Have you noticed how, in today's world, people respond faster to strangers online than to the people sitting right next to them? We live in a culture of constant availability, and yet, that availability is exactly what makes us invisible. Modern relationships often confuse attention with love. But if being always online really built connection, why do so many feel lonelier than ever? Society tells you that silence is weakness, that if you don't explain yourself, you'll be forgotten. But what if the opposite is true? What if silence is the very thing that makes you unforgettable? Welcome to StoicCraft, a place where timeless Stoic wisdom meets the harsh realities of modern life. Here, we don't just talk about philosophy. We translate it into tools you can actually use to reclaim your peace, protect your energy, and stand unshakable in a noisy world. Ignoring someone can sometimes be the most powerful move you will ever make. At first glance, that might sound cold, calculated, or even cruel. But the truth is, silence and absence often deliver a more devastating impact than any argument, explanation, or justification ever could. And this isn't about playing petty games or trying to inflate your ego. It's about reclaiming your emotional balance, about taking back the control that for far too long you placed in the hands of someone who never truly valued it. Think for a moment about how many times you've gone out of your way just to be noticed, how often you gave more of yourself than was ever asked for, only to be met with indifference. You replied instantly to every message. You made yourself available at all costs. You justified every gap in communication, every unanswered question, every silence, as if you were standing in a courtroom, desperate to prove your right to exist in someone else's life. In the beginning, it might have looked mutual, almost like both sides were giving equally. But with time, something shifted. The balance tipped, and suddenly it wasn't equal anymore. The scale weighed heavily in their favor, while you found yourself constantly giving, adjusting, explaining. The cruelest part is that you often don't even notice when this imbalance begins. The power game is rarely announced. It's built slowly, piece by piece, in subtle gestures. A delayed reply meant to test your reaction, an invitation that never comes, a compliment laced with hidden criticism. It becomes a silent dance where you adapt, shrink, mold yourself just to avoid losing something that was never truly yours to begin with. But there always comes a point when the rope is stretched too thin, and instead of the dramatic outburst you imagine, what happens is far more decisive. You stop chasing. You don't scream. You don't explain. You don't beg. You simply close the door and let silence take up the space where your constant presence once lived. And then something extraordinary happens. The very person who ignored you begins to notice you. What was once guaranteed becomes scarce. What was predictable turns into mystery. Your absence becomes a mirror that reflects their insecurities back at them. Suddenly, they feel smaller, less important, less in control. And like anyone afraid of losing power, they react. But not with genuine apologies or heartfelt recognition. Instead, what emerges is restlessness and almost desperate need to regain what slipped away. The irony is that their obsession is not born out of suddenly seeing your worth. It comes from the unbearable truth that control has slipped through their fingers. And nothing terrifies the ego more than losing control. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter they squeeze, the faster it escapes. This is where Stoic philosophy offers timeless wisdom. True power does not lie in how much you can influence others, but in how firmly you can govern yourself. Strategic silence is not weakness, nor is it revenge. It is the highest form of self-mastery, a declaration that you no longer need validation from outside sources to know who you are. Each day that you maintain your distance, it's as if you're laying one more brick in the wall of your emotional independence. And on the other side, the void you leave begins to work for you. Old memories resurface, past conversations get replayed in their mind, and every silence you hold is overanalyzed. Without even trying, your image begins to grow stronger, not because you are chasing, but because you have stopped chasing. What they don't realize, and maybe never will, is that by ignoring you, they actually created the perfect conditions for your strength to surface. By walking away, you cut off the only source of emotional fuel that sustained their ego. And here lies the secret no one wants to admit. When you stop being available, you don't disappear from their mind. Quite the opposite, you become a constant presence, an unsolved puzzle, an enigma that lingers. That blend of mystery and inaccessibility transforms initial indifference into quiet obsession. But be warned, this transformation doesn't happen by accident. It demands discipline, more discipline than reconciliation ever could. Because keeping that door closed, especially when nostalgia tugs at your heart or when sweet promises flood your messages, is far harder than giving in to the impulse to return. This is the breaking point where many lose their progress and slip back to square one. What separates those who win this silent game from those who collapse is clarity of purpose. You are not pulling away to cause pain. You are stepping back to protect yourself, to guard your peace, to shield your self-love from manipulation. And once you understand this at a deep level, everything shifts. You stop playing by someone else's rules. You set the pace, you dictate the rhythm, and you realize that true self-respect is not negotiable. So let me ask you, how many times have you broken your silence to explain yourself when no explanation was deserved? How many times have you let the fear of losing someone outweigh the need to respect yourself? And how often have you convinced yourself that sacrificing your own well-being was the only way to keep someone close? The truth is, that line of thinking keeps you trapped in cycles of emotional dependency. But strategic silence has the power to break those cycles. It doesn't just return control to your hands, it makes you impossible to ignore, even for those who once treated you as disposable. And perhaps by the end of this journey, you will realize that the goal was never to win them back at all. The greatest victory has always been reclaiming yourself, because there are moments in life when words are wasted but silence lands like a direct strike in the battle for emotional power. Strategic silence is not passive absence. It is a deliberate stance, a calculated presence that unsettles, intrigues, and completely disarms those who expect you to react. The echo of nothingness is often louder than any speech. When you master this art of powerful absence, every second without a response becomes a mirror in which they see their own shortcomings. Silent dignity does not beg, plead, or humiliate. Itself, it stands tall, unshakable, an invisible wall no one can cross. Most people grow up believing that constant presence is the same as love, but often that presence suffocates, drains, and strips you of control. Conscious distance, on the other hand, is not weakness, it's freedom. When you hand over all your presence and attention, you unknowingly give the other person control. The alternative, the conscious choice to create distance, is not weakness, nor is it running away. It is an act of emotional independence, a quiet declaration of self-worth. That distance is not a tantrum, it is calculated clarity. It is the wisdom to choose when and how you show up. It is the courage to place your self-respect above the constant urge to prove yourself to someone who may never have valued you in the first place. And in truth, self-love has never been measured by how much you sacrifice. It is measured by how much of yourself you preserve. Those who understand emotional control know that not every battle requires their presence, and that often the greatest victories are won by choosing not to play. Strategic silence forces the other person to confront their own emptiness without you having to lift a single finger. In the dangerous terrain of emotional manipulation, every word you speak can be twisted and turned against you. Silence, however, cannot be weaponized. It is safe ground. It is armor impenetrable, unshakable, protective of your inner strength. At first, it may seem counterintuitive, especially if you've grown used to the idea that words are your only tool. But the reality is that the absence of words carries far more power than any speech ever could. Those who once felt entitled to your attention quickly unravel when faced with the immovable wall of your silence. What is most fascinating is that silence always disturbs the one who has the most to lose. They begin projecting, imagining reasons, weaving stories in their head to fill the void. And in this whirlwind of thought, the balance of power shifts from the one who once dominated to the one who had the courage to step away. This is the essence of emotional maturity, to refuse impulsive reactions and instead choose thoughtful strategy. It is not about being cruel or unnecessarily cold. It is about making an intelligent choice that protects your dignity and prevents you from being held hostage in a toxic dynamic. When silence is carried with confidence and authority, it dismantles even the most elaborate manipulations. It becomes the antidote to emotional blackmail, to suffocating jealousy, to any attempt to keep you under constant control. In practice, this means you no longer rush to respond to provocations. You do not run to clarify every misunderstanding or fight to prove your innocence. You begin to understand that every needless explanation you give is like removing a brick from the wall of your emotional independence. And when that wall crumbles, so does your power. The remarkable truth is that once you master this art, the other person begins to crumble instead. Silence, when it is confident, reveals weaknesses words could never expose. Absence becomes a battlefield where patience is the only weapon, and patience always belongs to the stronger side. This is where emotional intelligence becomes your greatest ally. Strategic silence is not about punishing or ignoring out of spite. It is about protecting yourself from cycles that do not deserve your energy. It is not running away, it is a conscious form of detachment. Not pride, but growth. And the irony is striking. The very people who once dismissed you, who once thrived on ignoring you, suddenly find themselves restless, even obsessed. Those who once seemed in control begin to feel ungrounded. Those who once fed on your reactions now face the discomfort of your absence. And it all happens because you finally understood that silence is not omission, it is action. This path is not easy. Few have the courage to walk it. It demands that you let go of the need for external validation and accept that your worth does not hinge on recognition from others, but on who you are when nobody is watching. It is self-respect lived at its highest form. Powerful absence doesn't happen by chance. It is born of a conscious choice, a deliberate break from the need to please, and the bravery to withstand the discomfort it creates both in you and in them. And when you commit to this stance, the entire game changes. The one who once dictated the rhythm suddenly has no music to dance to. Predictability ends, and control slips like sand through their fingers. This is the moment you're emotional. Authority consolidates, not because you announced it, not because you demanded it, but because your silence declared it for you. It becomes like a shadow that follows them wherever they go, a reminder that something precious has been lost and may never return. For them, silence is unsettling. For you, it becomes liberation. It helps you separate what is essential from what is just noise. It strengthens the invisible line of your boundaries and restores you to the central role in your own life. And here begins a shift in perception that changes everything. You see, many of us grow up believing that to be seen is to be important, that replying immediately or always being available is proof of love, care, and connection. But this belief is a hidden trap. It places you in the hands of someone who knows exactly how to use it. Every quick reply becomes another piece of your independence surrendered. Every yes spoken without thought is another brick removed from the wall that once protected your self-respect. You become predictable, and in the game of power, predictability is pure gold. What looks like self-love on the surface is often just disguised dependence. You confuse attention for affection, availability for value, and this illusion, when left unchecked, corrodes your worth until you no longer know if you act from genuine desire or from fear of losing someone. The harshest part? By being constantly present, you inadvertently teach others not to value you. Presence without pause suffocates mystery, kills curiosity, and places your emotional control in the wrong hands. And those who crave power, they know exactly how to use it. While you rush to reply to messages, cancel plans to fit their schedule, and rearrange your life to stay in their orbit, your emotional growth stagnates. And what you thought was care turns out to be poison disguised as kindness. When you constantly chase connection, when you rush to be present at every moment, you give away more than just your time. You surrender your control. And from that moment, the power dynamic becomes unbalanced. What could have been prevented with a moment of calm distance, with calculated coldness, is lost in your impulse to please. By never giving the other person space to feel your absence, you allow them to live in comfort while you pay the price. And here lies the paradox. Absence, when used with wisdom, is often more powerful than any constant presence. But your need to control every detail of communication only proves one thing: you've already lost emotional control. You no longer act out of choice, but out of reflex, conditioned to respond to someone else's behavior. When you place your self-esteem in the hands of another, you give up the right to define your own boundaries. And without boundaries, the balance will always tilt in favor of the one who demands more, not the one who yields. This mistake is dangerous because it hides beneath the mask of virtue. Generosity, attention, care, they look good on the surface. But underneath lies attachment, dependence, and a quiet erosion of your independence. If you don't see the game for what it is, you're not playing it as a participant. You've become just another piece on the board. And a piece does not decide its own moves. It merely obeys. The more you give without balance, the more invisible you become. Your presence stops being a gift and turns into a guarantee. And what is guaranteed is rarely valued or respected. This is why you must understand something essential. Self-respect is not born out of how much you show up, but from how much you preserve yourself. Without emotional intelligence to guide you, you repeat patterns that keep you tied to people who know how to exploit your weaknesses. It's a slow destruction, not a sudden collapse. At first, it even feels like you're strengthening the bond. But over time, your unchecked giving transforms love into routine, and routine into disinterest. And when disinterest sets in, everything changes. The other person no longer fears losing you because you've never allowed them to feel the impact of your absence. Without absence, there's no room for reflection, no space for remorse, and no opportunity for them to truly recognize your value. What's lost isn't just the balance of the relationship, it's your sense of who you are outside of it. You become a hostage to a story they write, a script you never volunteered to follow, but one you unconsciously repeat. But here's the question: what if you flip the game? What if, instead of always being available, you made yourself rare? What if you allowed absence to speak for you? What you thought was care and devotion may in fact have been a prison you didn't even see. Your constancy, your willingness to always be there, turned into a silent power play, but not one you controlled. The other person learned to treat your presence as a right, not a privilege. And once something is guaranteed, its value dissolves. Day after day, your self-worth begins to erode. At first, you felt you were in control, believing that your devotion strengthened the bond. But the reality is harsher. This constancy created a hidden dependency where the more you gave, the less you received. And the less you received, the less you mattered. Slowly, your self-esteem deteriorates. Every act of presence without reciprocity becomes a silent reminder that you are not a priority. The silence of the other person begins to feel like an accusation that you didn't do enough. And driven by this invisible guilt, you scramble to fill every void, convinced that if you just gave a little more, balance would return. But instead, all you do is reinforce the very game that keeps you beneath them. This cycle exhausts you. It drains your maturity, not because you're growing, but because you're learning how to survive in a war you never chose to fight. It's a psychological burden that slowly chips away at your inner strength. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers. It sneaks in. Emotional manipulation becomes so subtle that eventually you can't even tell where your will ends and theirs begins. The line between genuine affection and control disappears. And once you lose that line, you lose your authority. You stop enforcing boundaries. You start living according to someone else's expectations. Your emotional world molds itself to their rhythm, not yours. And the powerful absence, the very thing that could have been your greatest ally, never happens. Because your fear of disappointing someone else is stronger than your need to protect yourself. This is the sharpest form of psychological power. When someone doesn't need to raise their voice, when all it takes is a delayed reply, a single look to control your actions, that's when you realize just how deep the grip runs. And yet, most of the time, you don't even see it. You believe you're in charge, but in reality, you've been led step by step into giving up your independence. Your life shrinks into a single exhausting goal: to keep the other person satisfied. But here's the hard truth: you'll never succeed. No matter how much you give, there will always be something more demanded. Another line to cross, another sacrifice to make. Deep down, you already know this, but the fear of losing keeps you locked in place. And that fear, its poison. Fear slowly corrodes your emotional independence. It eats away at every trace of self-love you still hold, and the damage goes far beyond the relationship itself. It seeps into your work, your friendships, even your health. Because when your mind is imprisoned, everything else in life loses vitality. You spend your energy holding together a role that was never yours to carry, and in the process, your true self fades further and further away. The cruelest part about emotional damage is that by the time you finally see it clearly, you've already lost so much of yourself that you don't know where to begin rebuilding. It feels like waking up in the middle of a minefield, every step uncertain, every move carrying the risk of shattering what little self-esteem you still have left. And this is where many people give up. They cling to the discomfort they already know rather than risk the unknown. But complacency is not safety. It's a silent sentence. Without change, there is no growth. Without movement, the toxic cycle continues. You've probably felt this before: the suffocating belief that if you step away, everything will collapse. But that belief is the very lie that sustains the cycle. In truth, nothing collapses except the illusion of control the other person has over you. As long as you remain trapped in this game, your emotional intelligence will be suffocated. And without emotional intelligence, you cannot form the steady stance you need to break free. Person who does not see themselves as the owner of their own life inevitably lives on scraps of love, scraps of attention, scraps of worth. This is the invisible price you pay each day, the gradual erosion of who you are. And the most alarming part is that this isn't accidental. It's by design. It is the very foundation of the game the other person is playing. And unless you change the rules, you will always play to lose. But imagine just for a moment that one day you decided to stop playing. No shouting, no drama, no emotional outburst. Just stillness. Instead of rushing to fill the void, you let silence do the work. It isn't anger, it isn't punishment, it's clarity. With quiet calculation, you stop. You cut contact, not to escape, but to reclaim authority. It becomes the birth of strategic silence. This absence is not the absence of a sulking child or a wounded ego. It is a powerful absence, born from self-respect and sustained by self-love. It's a maneuver of calm, deliberate coldness. a silent repositioning that says more than any long speech ever could. I am no longer available to be manipulated, controlled, or placed in the background, and their reaction is almost predictable. A person accustomed to immediate replies feels your absence like a physical blow to the ego. Your silence echoes through every space they once filled with their power. A constant reminder that something slipped away, something they may never get back. But here's the most important realization. This absence is not really about them at all. It's about you. It's about finally understanding that your worth has never been dependent on someone who had to make you feel small in order to feel big. That realization is the key that breaks the cycle. When you cut contact, you don't just step back, you sever the invisible ties of manipulation that once bound you. It's like unplugging a machine that has been draining your energy for years. Suddenly, the power shifts back into your hands, where it always belonged. At first, silence feels strange. It might even feel wrong. But over time, it becomes an ally. In the emptiness, you rediscover your self-esteem. You start to see your emotional boundaries with clarity. You rebuild maturity from the inside out. And soon, you realize that strategic silence is not merely about absence, it is about selective presence. You decide where, when, and with whom to invest your time and energy. That deliberate choice, grounded in self-respect, is what makes the gesture so powerful. The one who once controlled the narrative now stumbles, lost in a story they can no longer dictate. The ego that once feasted on dominance suffers because the power it relied on has slipped away. And what's most unsettling for them is that this shift didn't come from a dramatic confrontation, but from your calm, unwavering refusal to submit. From their perspective, you become an enigma. How could someone so predictable suddenly become unreachable? How could someone who always gave in now carry a cold, steady silence without flinching? This break in the pattern destabilizes them completely. And with each day of silence, the weight of your absence grows heavier. This isn't about revenge. It's about growth. It's about recognizing that real healing requires distance, and that sometimes the most profound act of love you can show is the love you give to yourself. Detachment in its purest form means freeing yourself from what holds you back, even if it hurts. Of course, they will try to re-establish contact. Subtle messages, disguised provocations, baited attempts to spark your reaction. But now you see the game for what it is. You know that replying means surrendering the authority you fought so hard to regain. And so, with each unanswered message, you send a far louder statement than words ever could. I don't play this game anymore. This quiet declaration becomes your manifesto of strength, your shield of emotional intelligence. It redefines your place in the world. You stop standing in the background of someone else's story and step into the lead role of your own. Self-respect stops being a theory you admire and becomes a practice woven into every choice you make. Over time, silence stops being a tactic and becomes part of who you are. You no longer feel the need to fill every empty space, answer every call, or stretch yourself to be everywhere at once. Instead, you discover the peace of being whole exactly where it matters. And ironically, it is often at this point, when you no longer crave validation, that others come chasing after you. Your absence creates curiosity. Your silence breeds unease. But unlike before, you are not swayed. Your self-worth no longer depends on their recognition. This is the moment when the power dynamic reverses. The one who once set the pace now stumbles to the rhythm of your silence. And this transformation didn't happen through force. It happened through maturity, through choice, through the quiet power of detachment. But remember, this is only the beginning. Once you taste freedom, the real challenge becomes maintaining it. Because keeping your distance is not only about physical separation, it's about building an invisible shield to protect your independence. It's about resisting the urge to react, even when every part of you wants to reply. That restraint, that calm, calculated coldness, is one of the purest marks of true emotional maturity. Every hasty reaction is like leaving a door wide open for manipulation to walk right in. The moment you act without pause, you give the other person access to your emotions, your stability, your peace. That's why self-control demands that you keep that door locked. At first, this discipline feels almost impossible. The habit of explaining, justifying, or fixing things runs deep. But each time you choose silence instead of impulsive reaction, you train your emotional control. Over time, this silence becomes armor-strong, protective, unshakable. No matter what the other person says or does to provoke you, your boundaries remain firm, and your self-respect remains intact. One of the simplest yet most effective tools in this practice is something I call the calculated pause. Before responding, you stop, you breathe, you assess the context, and then you ask yourself, if I respond now, will it strengthen me or weaken me? More often than not, the answer points toward silence. This pause shifts the power dynamic. It moves you out of the role of a puppet reacting to strings and into the role of a player controlling the game. With this stance, you begin to detach in a healthy way. You no longer feel compelled to show up in every conversation, to justify every absence, or to explain every decision. This emotional distance doesn't weaken you, it strengthens you. It keeps the other person unsettled while keeping you in control. And the secret here is consistency. Growth doesn't happen in one dramatic gesture. It's built from small, deliberate choices repeated every day. Every time you say no to the impulse to react and yes to your peace, you build inner strength. Brick by brick, this doesn't mean you'll never speak again. It simply means that when you do, your words will carry weight. Silence first ensures that your voice is heard with attention rather than dismissed as background noise. In this way, self-love becomes discipline. By keeping your distance, you prove to yourself that you don't need instant validation. You know now that the most important recognition isn't from them. It's from your ability to protect your own mental space. Protecting that mental space goes deeper than ignoring calls or avoiding meetings. It means filtering what and who has access to your energy. It means refusing to reopen old wounds, limiting empty conversations, and choosing with care where you place your focus. And something remarkable happens when you practice this. The other person begins to adapt to your rhythm. The unpredictability strips them of their control. The power that was once entirely theirs now shifts back to you, or even tips the balance in your favor. Of course, there will be attempts to test your resolve. Subtle provocations, disguised gestures, all designed to lure you back into old patterns. But each time you remain silent, you reinforce your authority and weaken their grip. And here is where emotional intelligence becomes essential. Not every attempt to reach out is sincere. Many are simply bait, hooks designed to drag you back into the same destructive cycle. Your job is to recognize these traps for what they are and to remain unmoved. Over time, something shifts. Silence stops being effort, it becomes habit. You no longer feel urgency to explain, prove, or defend. Your self-esteem grows, not because someone else validated you, but because you see your own strength in resisting what once controlled you. That is real growth, not the kind that bends under pressure, but the kind that grows deeper roots in the face of storms. The beauty of this strategy lies in its simplicity. It requires no dramatic confrontations, no exhausting justifications, only clarity and consistency. And it is precisely this clarity that makes silence impossible to ignore. When you master it, you understand a profound truth. You don't need to win arguments to win the game. The real victory lies in never letting another person dictate your actions or emotions. This is control without visible struggle discipline, sustained by calm strength. At its core, keeping your distance is an act of love toward yourself. It is choosing yourself even when that choice means embracing the discomfort of absence. But over time, absence transforms into freedom. And once freedom takes root, your perspective shifts. You begin to see silence not only as defense, but as a subtle, devastatingly effective form of offense. Because silence is not empty. The void you leave is not quiet. It is a psychological earthquake. It shakes their sense of certainty, echoing through their ego as a reminder that something has changed. What was once guaranteed is now uncertain. And for someone who built their strength on control, that uncertainty is unbearable. The powerful absence is never neutral. It exposes weaknesses the other tried to hide even from themselves. Without your constant presence, they are forced to face their own insecurities head-on, unable to project them onto you. That confrontation is painful. The mystery of your silence begins to erode them. Someone who once read you like an open book now finds blank pages. Predictability disappears, and every unanswered silence becomes a question with no answer. And that unanswered question is fuel for their restlessness, often for their obsession. What makes this so powerful is that the impact doesn't come from what you say, but from what you don't. Your silent dignity becomes more provocative than any speech could ever be. Every second of your absence whispers your self-respect and your refusal to yield. At first, they may respond with indifference, pretending your absence doesn't matter. But inside, the shift is already happening. The calculated calmness with which you maintain your distance leaves them helpless. Silence provides no clues, no footholds. And for someone who once thrived on shaping your reactions, this unpredictability is devastating. The effect is not only emotional, it becomes physical. Anxiety unsettles their body, their mind cannot find rest. And all of this happens because you built the one thing they never expected: emotional independence. That independence has become an impenetrable barrier. They begin to search reading into posts, scouring for signs, grasping for any hint of your emotional state. But you reveal nothing. and that emptiness becomes like hunger, gnawing at their self-esteem. The more they search, the deeper the lack grows. The obsession intensifies because their sense of worth was anchored to your attention. Without it, they face a void no new distraction can fill. This is the true side effect of your growth. You've stopped being predictable, and that destabilizes everything. What used to provoke you now falls flat. Emotional manipulation fails, and each failed attempt only reinforces your authority. With every silence, their power weakens and yours grows. This is the point where silence begins to rewrite their reality. In the absence of your words, they start mentally replaying the story, second-guessing their decisions, revisiting conversations, trying desperately to pinpoint the exact moment when control slipped from their hands. Silence forces them into this obsessive reflection, a review they cannot escape. And the deepest wound is not in what you took, but in what they realize they cannot replace. Others may step into your physical space, but none can replicate the unique presence you once offered. Your absence becomes a benchmark for comparison, a reminder that no one else can fill the void. In this way, your inner strength becomes the epicenter of their reaction. You remain unmoved, not because you seek to hurt, but because you refuse to be hurt again. That clarity, calm, firm, unwavering, is both irresistible and terrifying to someone who isn't prepared to face it. What was once certainty becomes doubt. Doubt turns into need. And when need goes unmet, it festers into obsession. This transformation is quiet but visible to anyone paying attention. They begin to wonder, will you come back? Do you still think of them? Do you still feel something? But you know the truth, these questions are not born of love. They are born of lost control. And for some, losing control is more unbearable than losing love itself. The silence you hold is not empty. It is a declaration, a message carved into the air. I know my worth, and it is not up for negotiation. That stance creates a tension they cannot escape. It keeps them restless, on edge, unable to settle, while they spiral in their attempts to decode your enigma. You move forward. What began as a simple withdrawal now shapes a new chapter of growth. Power is no longer about pleasing anyone else. It is about fortifying your boundaries, keeping them unshakable. And what they fail to grasp is that this absence is not temporary. It is not a tactic. It has become part of who you are. When that realization finally dawns on them, it cuts deeper than any words you could ever speak. But that leads to an even more important question. How do you turn this shift into a permanent change, one that prevents you from sliding back into old patterns? The answer lies in recognizing that the independence you've built is not a phase, not a trick to win them back or to teach a lesson. It is now a non-negotiable truth, a pillar of your identity. It is the filter through which every relationship must pass, determining what enters your life and what must remain outside. Strategic silence has evolved from a situational weapon into a way of life. It is no longer about punishing anyone. It is born out of clarity. You do not go silent to hurt. You go silent to protect. Protect your self-respect. Protect your self-worth. Protect the emotional control you worked so hard to regain. This stance is so steady that it no longer depends on whether they understand, react, or even notice. The absence that once had a target has become something broader, a conscious choice to preserve your peace, your dignity, your strength, no matter the cost. The turning point arrives when you realize you no longer have to prove anything. There is no urgency to be understood, no desperation to be validated. Emotional maturity means you no longer negotiate boundaries that are already non-negotiable. Your emotional frontier becomes a real unshakable wall. You no longer engage in draining conversations. You no longer make space for those who thrive on manipulation. You no longer play games that force you to question your value. This is your dividing line. They may still attempt to return, to reconnect, but the dynamic has changed forever. What once could have made you hesitate is now reduced to background noise. The calculated coldness you carry is not cruelty of the heart, it is the intelligence of self-preservation. And this is the moment where the game of power loses its relevance, because you no longer play. No, there is no contest for control when you already govern yourself. And nothing is more unsettling to someone who once thrived on dominating you than watching you detach, not out of spite, but out of freedom. This detachment is not empty. It is not lifeless. It is conscious liberation. You are no longer tied to the past, no longer chained to expectations that never belonged to you. You stand firmly in the present, with the authority to decide what stays and what goes in your life. And it is this calm authority that magnifies the impact on the other person, because when they finally realize your silence is not a pause, but a permanence, they understand they have lost something no force can recover. That truth corrodes the ego far more than any confrontation could. Little by little, their grip on your mind dissolves. They stop holding strategic importance. They no longer set the rhythm of your emotions, your choices, or your priorities. You've broken the architecture of the toxic relationship and rebuilt in its place. A stronghold where only those who respect your rules are allowed to enter. This right here is where emotional intelligence reveals its highest form. Emotional mastery reaches its highest state, not when you resist provocations, but when you stop being affected by them altogether. What once shook you now barely grazes the surface. And the most powerful thing about this transformation is its quietness. There are no grand announcements, no dramatic declarations. Those who notice the change will see it. Those who don't will remain on the outside, cut off from what has now become exclusive, your presence, your energy, your life. With emotional space freed, new energy emerges, and you begin to reinvest it in what truly matters. In this new landscape, the toxic past becomes nothing more than a faded chapter in a book you no longer reread. Growth is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you live. You stop trying to recover because you're already standing in your strongest, clearest, most shielded form. And this change has no reversal. Once you've tasted true freedom, any attempt at emotional imprisonment feels like an insult. This is the moment when your stance becomes unbreakable, when the other person finally grasps a truth they never expected. There is no bargain, no reconciliation that could ever outweigh the self-respect you've built. For many, this is a lesson too hard to accept. But for you, it marks the beginning of a new chapter. The real question now is not whether you can break free. You already have. The question is how you can continue to grow, to live fully, without ever slipping back into old patterns. They once mistook your silence for weakness, your absence for defeat, your distance for surrender, but time has proved them wrong. You did not disappear to hide, you stepped back to rediscover yourself. And in that rediscovery, you built something they can never touch, your emotional freedom. What once was a territory others walked through freely has become a fortress. The gates are closed, the key discarded. Access is no longer automatic. Your energy, your time, your attention, these have become priceless, and they are no longer available to just anyone. And this is what torments them the most. They realize they are no longer a priority, no longer part of your chosen circle. The psychological power they thought they had dissolved the very moment you stopped reacting. The more they struggle to recover it, the clearer it becomes. There is no path back. They revisit old conversations like archaeologists, digging through ruins, searching for clues, interpreting every silence as a hidden code, replaying mundane memories as if they held secret meaning. But while they spiral in the maze of uncertainty, you walk a straight, illuminated road forward. For them, your absence is confusion. For you, it is clarity. What they miss is not you, it is the access they once had. They long not for your love, but for the influence they used to wield, the control they believed was permanent. And that, my friend, you will never hand back. The irony is sharp. What feels like endless uncertainty to them feels like freedom to you. Each step you take becomes a declaration that the past has no claim on your present. Your absence is not a void, it is a fortress. And perhaps that is the deepest wound they will feel. The realization that while they drown in endless questions, you breathe freely, secure in peace they can never take from you. That peace is not negotiable. Your maturity is not a game to be restarted when it suits them. You are not waiting for them to miss you, not counting the days to a dramatic reunion, not measuring the worth of your silence by their obsession. You measure it by how fully you can live without needing them. And that indeed is victory. The old game is over, ended not by chance, but by your decision to place a period where there once were only commas. You've learned that respecting yourself is more powerful than any validation others could give you. Silence carried with dignity is not a temporary tactic. It is a lifestyle, a way of living that no longer bends to manipulation. They may still try to provoke you, to reopen conversations, to disguise interest with indifference. But you've learned to read between the lines. You can smell manipulation before the words are even spoken. And as tempting as a beautifully packaged promise might be, you know the truth. Going back would mean selling cheap the freedom that cost you everything to earn. The truth is harsh, but liberating. They are the ones who lost. They lost the version of you who accepted less than you deserved. They lost the privilege of being a priority in your life. They lost access to the best parts of you. And for someone who once thrived on consuming your energy, there is nothing more devastating than realizing the source has dried up. What remains for you is what should have always been yours: peace, clarity, and the undeniable power to decide. To decide who enters, who stays, who leaves, and who never comes back. Because in the end, the greatest secret is this: the power to disarm others does not come from shouting louder or proving more. It comes from living in such a complete, self-assured way that their opinions and presence stop being essential to you. And when you arrive at that point, there is no turning back. So if this message resonates with you, if it touched that place inside where you know it's time to turn the page for good, then take the next step. Subscribe to this channel because here you will find more than just inspiring words. You will find real tools to strengthen your self-love, to shield your mind against manipulation, and to live with the unshakable confidence that no one can take from you. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new piece of wisdom. Each video here is another layer of armor, preparing you for the power games life may throw your way. And share this with someone you know is still stuck in a toxic cycle. They may need exactly this reminder today. Sometimes a single sentence can be the spark that changes an entire life. You've already taken the first step simply by being here. Now it's time to walk into the future where you're the center of your own life, where no one else writes the rules for you, because silence is not weakness. It is power, it is freedom, and it is the secret that disarms them forever. Every new piece of wisdom you take in is like another layer of armor, strengthening you for the challenges ahead. Life will continue to test you. People will still attempt to pull you into games of power, control, and manipulation. But with each lesson you internalize, you are better prepared, sharper, stronger, and less vulnerable to their tactics. And here's something important. Don't keep this transformation only for yourself. Share it. Somewhere in your circle there is a friend, a sibling, a colleague, someone quietly struggling in a toxic dynamic, waiting for a spark to help them see the truth. Sometimes all it takes is a single sentence to shift a life's direction. One small moment of clarity can awaken the courage to walk away. You might be the one who delivers that spark. By watching this far, you've already proven something to yourself, that you are ready for change, ready to step into a new chapter where you are at the center of your own life. This is where your story begins, not defined by what others demand of you, but by the standards you set for yourself. And as you move forward, carry this with you. Silence is never weakness. Silence is power. Silence is freedom. It is the unshakable shield that disarms anyone who tries to diminish you. So walk tall, with clarity and strength. You are not defined by who ignores you, who undervalues you, or who tries to control you. You are defined by your decision to respect yourself. And once you embrace that truth, there is no turning back. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever broken your silence and instantly regretted it? Share your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you're ready to go deeper, explore our curated playlist on Stoic strategies for emotional power and resilience. Each video builds on the last, giving you the armor you need to face life's toughest tests.